Kevin Coyle.
Thank you very much. Well, that's quite an introduction. I'll not repeat everything that he said, but I will introduce myself. I'm Kevin Coyle. I'm a developer. I'm sorry that I'm not going to talk too much about code. I'm going to try and keep it a little light, but I work with Brad Frost and Josh Clark at an agency called Big Medium. And we just go around large companies and we listen to them and we give them advice on how to create their design systems, both with design and code. So the thing that I want to talk about really is I've noticed in my modicum of experience that there sometimes is a bit of a gap between different stakeholders, between design and dev. And I've been thinking, really, is how can we bridge that gap? Or as Gina said previously, how do we eliminate that gap? But then I thought about, can AI help it? But really, I think, can we do it? Because design systems are for human beings. AI might help us, but we're the ones that are doing it. And it's a communication tool for people. So before I start, though, can I just get a gauge of like who's in the audience? Have we got any designers in the room? Just raise your hand, make a bit of noise. Wow, it's most of you. All right, any developers? Yes, represent. Okay, that's great. Any Scrum Masters, project managers, or anything like that? Oh, we've got one. The rest must be in meetings or something, I don't know. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about then is gatekeeping. So, we all have our own expertise, our little areas that we're comfortable with, our silos, if you must. And when we have our teams making a product or making our design systems, we'll often have different people that take those roles. And they will be the front-end developer, the designer, the back-end developer, and the client. You might be noticing a bit of a pattern here. I'm a little obsessed with beagles, not just because I have two, but I just genuinely think they're the best type of dog, and I won't hear anything otherwise. So I've had some difficulties with siloization in the past, and sometimes it can lead to some hilarious things that happen. I'm going to tell you a story, though. And this happened over a decade ago, so hopefully there's no one worked with me over a decade here. There's no one here that worked. Good, I can speak freely then, that's good. Names, locations, and species have been protected, both to protect confidentiality and the innocent. Okay, so it was one of my first contract jobs that I took out. After leaving a short period of employment, I used to work for TalkTalk, so if you've had any broadband problems, I was probably the cause of it. It was in a lush location in the good old British countryside, and it was probably raining. And I was working for a small agency. This agency specialized in just doing big secret healthcare projects. When I got in, I was greeted by the most delightful receptionist, and I was quickly ushered into the back rooms by the development manager. When we got there was a door, and the door said on the top of it, "Do not enter unless you have explicit permission." The door shut. Good that, isn't it? Was brought into a meeting room kind of like that, but not really as fancy, to be honest, and it didn't smell like that looked. Oh my God. Everyone had their own key seats in there. You had, at the top of the table, there was the front-end devs. At the other end, there was designers. I was on my own. I was the Drupal, SQL, MySQL, PHP nerd that just sort of made things go. I've reused the slide because I really like the design. I'm sorry, it's a bit lazy of me. We got down to business. We worked diligently through many weeks of development, creating 2 websites. The first was the pre-launch site. That was like here's a new product, it's great, come and buy it, come and see it. And the second was the actual product website. We worked like a conveyor belt. UX passed over to design passed over to developers, the front-end developers, and then they finally threw it over to me, who had to make it go somehow in WordPress. Not WordPress, Drupal. Oof, memory's failing me there. All locked in that really sweaty box. The days were long and the memes and laughs were strong. There was a meme going on at the time about chimpanzees and a Segway or something. The vast majority of our time was spent making the pre-launch site. The site was an unholy arrangement of whizzing animations going all over the place in these little clouds that was seemingly in random places with large text and that barely fit. Kind of looked like this. Yep, I had to build that. So, this is the conveyor belt. The deadline was approaching, and, well, the conveyor belt broke down. The site had to be translated into a dozen languages. We didn't know that to begin with. We weren't told that. It had to be translated into all these languages that had long words, and they didn't fit into the clouds. We all had to actually start working together. People with the labels of design, front-end development, UX, and backend suddenly vanished. We were all in the trenches together. The door unlocked. UX started helping with design. Front-end development started helping with Drupal, believe it or not. Bless them. And I started sharing code with them as well, sharing ideas and adapting them so they better fit in the end ecosystem. If only we did this from the start. After a few 4 a.m. finishes, and those drives were difficult, coming back from there at 4 a.m., we finally were ready to submit the final project. The tension was lifted, and our intrepid team breathed a collective sigh of relief. It was time to celebrate, but we didn't do too much because we were a little exhausted. Taking a drink for celebration. A little time later, maybe a week or two, I stayed on whilst most of the other contractors left. And we were still sort of jubilant that we've done a project, it's in the bag, it's done. Then, suddenly, the dev manager came into our room and summoned us back for a meeting. When we were told, I'm keeping this blank, some words that, to this day, I just can't suppress my disbelief about this. It turned out that the agency wasn't actually meant to build the site. We built this entire site all that time. Honestly. There were some vague contractual misconceptions and breakdowns in communication between legal, the client, services, and the agency. We were only meant to deliver the PSDs. All the effort, all the long nights, all the chimpanzees on Segways were for nothing. Our work would never see the light of day. The gaps in the room were audible, and honestly, it felt like the temperature just dropped a few degrees. So, in reflecting on this story, I do see quite a few, maybe, breakdowns in communication, some problems. The first, which would have still been major if it wasn't for that big last thing, were the silos. Everyone stuck to their own lane and didn't really want to engage with each other. It was always thought of, that's not my problem. I can't understand design. I can't do that. Oh, I don't understand how that's coded. Just make it work. There was quite a lot of that. The second was false assumptions that things would just work. No real thought about whether things can be translated right or any thought about that. We just had static designs, and that was it. It would go. It would work. The third was that everyone was speaking to different technical languages, but about the same things. We would describe the exact same thing in many different ways. The suggestion here isn't really for designers to become developers, to become project managers. As my colleague Josh Clark says, only one deliverable really matters. And usually, that is the end project, website, design system that you're building. Granted, we didn't actually know what we were delivering at the time, at the end. What was our deliverable? We don't know, but we should have. We really should have. The rest are just build artifacts. Wireframes, that type of thing, they're just build artifacts. They don't really matter at the end. How could we have resolved this? Well, we should have embraced new tooling. There were things around there that we could have used, but in fact, we actually just printed off, literally, we printed off PSD designs and moved the clouds around so we get a good impression of how the animations would work. But with tooling such as Figma's developer mode now, Zeppelin's handover tools, some of the quantifiable ambiguity that we used to have when we made that should be eradicated now. We shouldn't have to guess at dimensions or trivial things like that. We shouldn't have to measure things in centimeters. We sort of did that, honestly. But don't throw things over the fence. Don't just give your Zeppelin to a developer and say, here you go, it's done. I'm not going to talk to you again. Don't do that. Use the tooling as a conversation, not a mitigation for a conversation. Pick up the phone. Developers and designers should just sit together over the new components. Brad Frost and Dan Mull had a great video on this process where they sat together and they actually just worked in parallel. This helps demystify both parts and stops the other side thinking that they're incomprehensible techno wizards. By exposing devs and designers to each other's process and having occasional parallel working sessions, you can start to demystify the other process. What they do becomes clearer. Back when I used to work in person, this was a little easier. I used to just float over to someone's desk. In fact, at TalkTalk, I used to actually have a second guest seat just next to me so people could just rock up and sit next to me and talk to me. It's a little harder now with remote work. I love remote work, but it is a little harder now, and you just have to make the effort. Put a quick call in with your colleague, send a Slack message and say, hey, do you want to chat about this? And just do it. Even if you think that you know how to do it, just talk to them and ask them why you built it like this. How does it work? Be wary of wireframes. Fail to prepare, then prepare to fail, right? Well, not so much. Wireframes tend to, and this might be controversial, and apologies for that, they tend to cement things in too early. They help foster a conveyor belt approach, which can cause problems when you have to rapidly iterate or change things. And next, okay, this is controversial. The code is the source of truth. When it's built, the design's the blueprint of what it is. But when it's built, code is the source of truth. But manually writing code isn't the only way to do it. For a while now, we've embraced design tokens in our design systems. They've materialized somewhat in Figma variables, and they've existed in Sketch for longer. As the time of writing, though, it's not natively possible to be able to import and export these variables into Figma and get them into code. However, some plugins exist that you can do that, and you can try that if you'd like to. But personally, what I would love to do is for the designer and the developer to sit down and look at these design tokens and start coding them in parallel. And the designer can explain to the developer, hey, here's all the colors, here's all our tokens, here's why. And that's really important because often developers will just not care and we'll just write out a bit of JSON or we'll look for a CSS variable. But it's good to know the why, and it's good to explain the process. In the future, we may well have a nice little export button, but please do not use that as an excuse not to have a conversation about it. Death to waterfall. Your system isn't a conveyor belt. A design system has goals, and each goal has an ending, but the design system itself doesn't, in fact, have an ending. Just because the design work is done doesn't mean the designer should go off to pastures new. stick around, see how it's going, make some little changes, that sort of thing. So, with this poorly aligned slide, I told you I was a developer. I'm sorry. Only one deliverable matters. It's about the destination, how we all get driving there. It's not about sticking in our lane. Don't throw it over the fence. It's weak communication for sure. But also, the way we work too much early on in high fidelity could be covered in a conversation. What's the smallest thing to do to help your collaborators know what to do next? Developers, someone was over there that was a developer. Help designers help you. Don't be that mystical little techno wizard talking nonsense. Think carefully about what you're showing and try and make the person understand it. And same with designers as well. Your whole job is to set up developers for success. What do they need? Code is the source of truth, and this may be a novel idea for some, but the expectation is the design is the source of truth where most people start. But it's really the blueprint. Once we've written the code, we look to that. So I baited you all here with AI. And I haven't spoken a single word about it yet. But let's think, we've talked about what people can do, but what can AI do to help us mitigate some of these problems? Well, first thing it can do, by disambiguating communications. I don't know why I picked such a large word to stay on stage. Sorry about that. We all speak these different technical languages. And sometimes having a little translation layer, like a little Babel fish, something like that, can help us. And AI is great at that. Large language models such as GPT is amazing at being able to cut through the noise in large data sets as well, so it can translate it for you. AI can help keep your team organized by simplifying processes. That's not to say it's there to replace your project manager, but what it can do is help stakeholders get a better idea of what's going on in a project in a more familiar way for them. It can rephrase things, it can reframe things. Additionally, AI can help generate code and even designs. I don't know if any of you have seen design generation tools with prompts, but there's a lot of them going about now. And they can help for rapid prototyping. But only as a starting point, really. So, to help with this, at Big Medium, I created a tool called Dr. Frank. And it's not a beagle with this one. It's a little tool that I made to basically do what ChatGPT can do, but it does a few extra things that are great in a company environment. And the best thing is, though, is that most companies can build one too. You don't have to be Google to take advantage of these things. But why would you? Well, when you build your own, your data is private as you want it to be, depending on what tools that you use. So that means that you can put in things like company contracts or your project management details or even your emails, and the AI could understand it. You could get it used to your company style and the way that you speak, people in your company. You could make it more inclusive and more adapted for your company. And you get control of it as well, which is really important with AI because sometimes it can be unpredictable. So why did I build Dr. Frank? Well, strangely enough, I was having a bit of a career crisis a few months ago, and I thought, what can I do? I'm going to write a book. So I started writing a sci-fi novel. But the problem was, I just don't know how to write. And I don't want AI to write it for me, because otherwise it's just going to be randomly full of things like, as an AI language model assistant, I can't help you with that. So I felt that I needed a coach. So I thought, how can AI read my book and give me pointers on where I'm going wrong? So I created Dr. Frank. It kept criticizing me about my pacing, which is probably why I'm going to go to the next slide now. What Dr. Frank can do, it can take very large amounts of content. It can ask users to ask questions on the content. So if there's something in there that you want to understand in your entire company knowledge base, so some of you might have lots of knowledge in Confluence or in places like zeroheight that it's difficult to access, tools like Dr. Frank are really good for that. And I can't state enough, privacy. Privacy is so important with these things. And another cool thing as well is these types of tools, like Dr. Frank, can be used to prototype AI-based projects. So it doesn't have to just be used for reading a book or knowledge bases. You can use it to do prompt engineering, which is really cool. I'll show you some examples of that later. One thing that Dr. Frank can do is reduce something called hallucinations by only returning the response based upon what info it has. I don't know if many of you have seen things on ChatGPT where you've asked for some medical studies and it's completely made up the citations and it's completely made up the people that have contributed to that knowledge. Dr. Frank won't do that, not always. But don't trust it. AI still lie. As I said, it can store all your project and company's knowledge and can be used as a translation layer between stakeholders. So I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Frank. I'm going to show you it. A live demo of a site that is actually live. And let me see if I can get this on the screen for you. I'm going to change it to mirror mode. Okie dokie. Okay, so this is just a really simple tool. It's something that we've made internally. It's probably never going to be released. The aim of this, really, of showing you it, is to really get your minds thinking about how can you embrace AI as well. So, I work with Brad Frost, as I've previously mentioned. And Brad Frost writes a lot of stuff. And because I work with him, he expects me to read it, all of it. Now, I was going to show you an article that we've been writing this week about different design system layers. But in typical fashion, that has just been taken into draft, and I can't show you it. So instead, let's talk about a topic which we're all familiar with. Atomic design. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Is that big enough, or do you want bigger? You see it? Yep. Great. Okay. Right. We've fine-tuned this API to we've fine-tuned this model to help us, but most of the time this is just stock GPT-4 hosted in Microsoft Azure. Not completely private, but it's reasonably private. If you wanted total privacy, the best thing to do is to host your own model somewhere else, like Llama 2 or something like that. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to upload the entire Atomic Design book, and I'm going to get Dr. Frank to read it for me. So this is a PDF of Atomic Design, and I'm giving it to Dr. Frank. It's saying ingesting. Basically, that means it's reading it, and it's re-encoding it so that it can understand it, and we can ask questions. Okay, it is done. And now I'm going to ask a question about Dr. Frank, well, about Atomic Design to Dr. Frank. And I'm going to ask a basic one that we should all know the answers to. But what are the atomic stages? This takes a little bit of time, so I'm going to talk over it whilst it's doing. And it's going to read through all of Atomic Design. It's going to just give us that. There you go. The 5 stages are atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, and pages. Everyone probably knows that already. That's not very interesting. But it's done that from the book. Let's ask another question. something that probably won't be on anywhere else other than the book. Like, for example, who is Brad Frost's chemistry teacher? That's in the book somewhere. So, what is the name of the author's chemistry? Now, let's check that's that. Okay, so this is risky. Sometimes this doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, don't judge me too harshly. But there we go. So it's read through and says the author's chemistry teacher was Mr. Ray. I would hope that the name still is Mr. Ray, but that's what it can do. It can go through and ask questions. But maybe you just don't want direct answers like that. Maybe you want to be able to have it explained for maybe someone of my level or something like that. So explain atomic design like I am 10. Now, it probably won't be very creative with this, and it'll probably use Lego. Hopefully, it'll be creative, though, but we'll see if it can do this. But the point of this really isn't that you can just upload atomic design. You could upload your entire company knowledge, your own personal knowledge. I personally have a project here where it uploads my, there we go, Lego. Okay, that's boring, but don't talk about Lego. So let's do it again. You can upload everything that you have to it, and you can search through it rapidly, and you can translate it so that other people can understand it. So you might have design guidelines in there that you want to give to a developer, and they might ask questions. Let's give it a time. I think it's really thinking about this one. There we go. So, imagine you have a jigsaw puzzle. Atomic design is like that, but I'm not going to read all of this. But there you go. It's explained it now in a different way. You can ask it to rephrase things, which I suppose that could be useful, I guess. I don't know. There's other things as well that we can use with Dr. Frank. One of the other ways that I've used it is for code generation. And what we've done here is we have given Dr. Frank, there we go. We've given Dr. Frank knowledge of our code base that we use. Internally at Big Medium, we have our own web component library that has very particular ways of coding. And we've asked it for an alert component, just to code a basic one for us. And it's given us the code for it, just from this prompt here. This isn't anything like other tools, which I'll show you another tool in a second. This has actually got contextual knowledge of the way in which you work, of your company culture, of how you communicate. And it's created some code. And it could do that with documentation as well. There's a few other little things that you can do with this type of thing. I'm not creative enough to be able to think of many of them, so I've opened this up to my entire team. And if anyone's got any ideas as well, please reach out to me on Slack or not Slack, you don't have my Slack, on Twitter or something like that. All right, let me go back to the slides and see if this works. Okay. Whew. So back to my story. What do you think would have happened if all of our information back then in 10 years ago would have been in the contract, would have been in Dr. Frank, and it read the contract? Well, first, 10 years ago, it would have been a sci-fi miracle, to be honest, and people would have been calling you all sorts of things, but you would have told Dr. Frank, or your tool, hey, we're just about to build the HTML, we're just about to build the Drupal site, and it would say, whoa, that's not in the contract. You're not meant to be doing that. Communication could have been made easier. There are additional tools as well. Vercel is making one called x0.dev. This does code generation here. So they've asked to create a SaaS pricing table, which I'm sure we've all been victim to in the past. And there's some code that it's used for that. Big difference between this and Dr. Frank, and they've done a great job. It's better than my tool, definitely. But Dr. Frank actually knows your customer, knows what you do, and will change the code in style accordingly. But in summary, though, tools such as non-AI tools like zeroheight and Figma, or AI tools like ChatGPT or our very own Dr. Frank, or v0.dev should only be used to augment your team. They shouldn't be used to replace members of your team. They shouldn't be used to stop conversation or engagement. People should use them as a talking point, as a springing off board. Humans have the monopoly on creativity, and we still will and always will. AI isn't creative, it just appears creative. This is coming to the end of my talk, but I hope that my story wasn't too boring for you, and it was kind of crazy what happened. And I've learned quite a lot of things in my time working with design systems, working with product teams. There's a lot of choices that we can make, and it's overwhelming of the tools, of the ways of working, of the processes. But what's most important is that you choose what works for you. Thank you very much.